You're watching TVC Breakfast. Now, the federal government and some non-governmental organizations recently expressed concerns over harmful traditional practices against women and girls, despite extant laws against such practices. They attributed the increasing cases to delay by some state governments to adopt and implement the Child Rights Act and the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, delay in the prosecution of offenders, the culture of silence, among others. Now, a 2018 report by the Nigeria Demographic Health Survey shows an overall 20% of women aged 15 to 49 are survivors of female genital mutilation. Now, the World Health Organization, however, says that the FGM, as it is called, has no health benefits of any kind, and it harms the girls and women, causing trauma, pain, bleeding, infections, vaginal fistula, and death in some extreme cases. This is what we'll be talking about in the next couple of minutes. So joining me now is Ozofu Ugemudia, a lawyer and partner at Udodoma and Bello Sagi Chambers. She is joining me from Port Harcourt. Ozofu, it's good to have you join me this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, despite the fact that we all know, and for those who may still be ignorant, they would have heard somehow that there are no benefits whatsoever for female genital mutilation. Yet the practice goes on and on and on. I wonder how so. What is still fueling this when the federal government and those who know have even, passed laws against female genital mutilation in some quarters?
Yeah, thank you. I think before I go to what I think is fueling it, I think it's important to point out that Nigeria accounts for about 10% of global prevalence of this. And in Nigeria, it's most prevalent in the southeast and southwest. And so for the states we looked at, so we in our firm were part of a study recent study by the Stop Court Project, implemented by the Hazy organization, and they focused on the southwest because across the two regions, the southwest is actually the most prevalent in Nigeria, and within the southwest, Ekiti State, Osun State, and Oyo State are the most prevalent. Incidentally, in all these three states, they have state laws against FGM. So Oyo State has the Violence Against Women's Law, 2016. Osun State has the Female Circumcision and Genital Mutilation Prohibition Law as far back as 2004. And Ekiti State has Gender-Based Violence Prohibition Law passed in 2019. So there are laws. For two of these states, they actually have state agencies that have been set up to discourage and enforce these laws. But what we find is it still prevails. I think it's because it's prevalent in the grassroots. So maybe, amongst in the rural areas where people are not as exposed or enlightened to the harms of these things, so they continue to practice it. They believe that it helps a woman to be to stay sexually pure and not be promiscuous, and it brings some sort of pride to the family, to have daughters that are not promiscuous, and that's really the traditional belief behind it. Because, as you've said, the United Nations has emphasized there's no health benefit to it at all. Incidentally, the Osun State law actually has some exemptions where you perform it under a surgical procedure if it's required to save the woman's life, or it's performed to remove maybe cancerous material, something like that. But I think even those exceptions are a bit too wide. It's hard to imagine why you would need to perform FGM to save a woman's life. So I think even that needs to be looked at again. If there are exemptions, they have to be really strictly construed. And I think another reason why it's prevalent is enforcement. We couldn't find cases in our research, couldn't find cases of anyone that has been prosecuted and convicted, and yet there's still this high level of prevalence. So it means that the law is not being enforced and there's not enough policing behind this practice.
All right. Now, if we take a trip to some of the villages in some of the states that you mentioned, either Osun State or Ekiti State or your state, of course, those who perform the FGM are well known in the villages that they reside. In fact, some of them have a lot of respect and regard. In some of the villages, they are called doctors, whatever they call them, and all of that. So which means these people are known. I wonder how it is still difficult to either speak to these people to stop this act, or there are some cultural backing which they have that it is becoming difficult for them to stop the act.
I think that, it's, as you were talking, it reminded me of, just walking down the street in Nigeria. Almost every street, you probably find litter, plastic all over the place. Yeah, we all know that we shouldn't throw litter, and people do it all the time. I think that the same thing, it lies with the states. The laws are there, the enforcement tools are available, but the laws are not being enforced. So if the states are serious about it, I think a lot of if there's a lot of enlightenment. So if you saw jingles on TV and on the radio constantly telling you that this thing is wrong and you should stop it, if there was education at the grassroots in the primary schools, and children were coming home to tell their parents that, oh, this is what I was taught in school and it's not right for this to be done. If there was enlightenment in the primary healthcare facilities and women were going in there and saying, being told in their local languages that this practice needs to stop. Don't allow your daughters be subjected to this. And men were hearing it as well. I think you will find that people will begin to question, because mothers that have experienced it, grandmothers, I'm sure they didn't have a good experience. And when they learn about the harm, I think they will be able to speak up for their daughters and granddaughters. I think that will help. Then in addition, the state, so I think if the state was investing in this sort of enlightenment, they will begin to see a drop. And then in addition to that, maybe after you've done all this and then you tell people we are going to enforce the laws, and you see that it's still going on, then you need to make a case out of one or two people. And then people will know that it's serious. And then, if they're doing it, they can't actually even be known to be practicing it. But for now, we have the letter of the law, we have the agencies, but nothing is going on, or not enough is going on.
All right. Now, if the states, like you said, are not enforcing the provision of the laws where they are relevant or where they are necessary, we know that when it comes to FGM, there are so many international NGOs and even local NGOs that partner government and, they have a network. What would it take for some of these NGOs to come together to sue these people to court, at least to begin to show that some cases are in court one way or the other?
I think maybe what they will need is some victims, because to show their cause of action, they will need some victims, and maybe bring a case for enforcement of their fundamental human rights. And I say that because even though our constitution, the Nigerian constitution, does not specifically speak to FGM, every Nigerian citizen is entitled to respect for the dignity of their person and should not be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment. And I think all the research has shown that FGM is torture, it's inhuman and degrading treatment. It has no benefit whatsoever. So I think that maybe sponsoring some victims to sue for the enforcement of the breach of their fundamental human rights will certainly put this out there in the fore. What I think for most non-governmental organizations, they try to always explore engagement, diplomacy, knowledge sharing and all that. So they don't usually go the route of suing, but any victim has the right to sue and can sue and can get support for suing if that's what it takes. But we certainly need to put some action behind the letters of the law we have. And that's the thing with Nigeria. We have laws. On most issues, we already have laws. The main problem is implementation, enforcement, and also enlightenment. Because in the rural areas, most people have basic literacy. And some people are still illiterate. And so you need to speak to them in a language they understand. So translate these jingles and posters and education into their local language and make it consistent, something they hear all the time.
All right. Now, there is a talk about the culture of silence. You mentioned the issue of trying to get some victims to, speak up. But we all know that some people, wouldn't want to come out to say anything, and it perpetuates the culture of silence, which compounds the solution that we would have found, because when it's coming from a victim, of course, it makes it easier. But what do you think is fueling this culture of silence, even in the 21st century, where people should be aware that there is help out there?
I think, like we've already established, a lot of this is happening in rural areas. I don't think it's ladies, a lot of ladies that are born and bred and educated in Lagos and, Abuja and Port Harcourt, the big cities. Most of them are shielded from this. They may not even know that it's going on. They do I've actually asked a young girl recently who had never heard about FGM, didn't even know it existed. So in the rural areas where there's a lot of communal living, it's seen as something that should be done to a girl for the dignity of her family. And so that it's actually one of the myths is that it makes her more eligible for marriage. Like the groom will know that this girl has not been touched, has not been, moving around with men. So in societies that believe this, for a girl to come out and challenge or speak against what her parents made her or did to her, essentially, because they're the ones that will take her there and say the woman should do it or the traditional circumciser should do it. It will be going against your family, going against your community and all those norms. And it takes a lot to do that. I think that's why. It's similar to rape, once shame is associated with speaking up, it takes a lot for you to ignore that shame and still speak up. And I think that's probably what is fueling it.
All right. Now, for the sake of enlightenment, for people who need to know some of these things, can you help highlight some of the dangers of FGM, some of the elementary dangers of FGM for people to really bond with, so we understand better?
Yeah, so because it's not conducted within a sterile medical facility, there's a risk of infection. So tetanus is one of the major infections you could get because you don't know the state of the equipment that's being used. In addition, the parts of the woman that are being cut off are parts that were clearly put there for a purpose. And so when they're not there, she's more likely to the functioning of her reproductive system may be affected. It could lead to cysts, persistent bleeding, problems with conception and childbirth. And so those are some of the, and of course, depending on the infection, if it's bad enough, it could lead to other sicknesses and ultimately death.
All right. Now, you are a lawyer. Can you share with us any experience that you've had or any encounter that you've had in the course of trying to create enlightenment or trying to make people understand that FGM is not the way to go?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I have my interaction with any advocacy against FGM has been through our firm's pro bono offering. So what we do is provide free legal support to the non-profit organizations that advocate against FGM. And so there was, I think the first one we were involved with was the 28 Too Many research, and that actually won an award for its focus on FGM in Africa. And today, online, if you just Google 28 Too Many, they provide up-to-date information and they keep tracking and they engage with governments on what's going on with FGM across Africa. Unfortunately, Africa is one of the hotspots. There's some points in Asia and Latin America, but Africa is the hotspot for FGM till today. And then most recently, we worked again with the Stop the Cult project, run by the Hazy organization, and that focused on the 3 states I talked about. So really bringing it closer to home, Ekiti, Osun, and Oyo states. And it was in the course of that we actually found out that there weren't that like implementation. We couldn't find evidence of implementation or that any cases have been properly prosecuted. So that's how we have approached it as a firm, and I have as a lawyer.
All right. Now, there has been one way or the other. Of course, we know that there's still much work to be done when it comes to creating enlightenment and awareness, but there has been some effort all the while. How much of impact has that had on the level of awareness of people about FGM from your observation?
I don't think, I mean, I think people like you and I we're enlightened, we're aware, we see when it's in the news. But I don't think that the enlightenment in the rural areas and at grassroots and in primary schools is as much as, in fact, I think it's far below what it should be. I think that every Nigerian child going through primary school has to be taught about this because it's, part of social studies or something, or the societal ills in our country that they should be aware of and they should, not participate in. I think it should be there. It's not part of the primary curriculum. I think healthcare facilities, primary healthcare in rural or across the country, but certainly in all the rural areas, need to have some, support to provide consistent enlightenment and training. Just the same way, I remember when there was a push towards family planning, and in primary healthcare facilities, you see posters and things, and they'll say, oh, you can talk to your physician or advisor here. I think we need to also have that kind of backing for providing this enlightenment within primary healthcare facilities, in schools, and just generally in rural communities. It takes funding to cover all these places. Some of these non-profit organizations actually have the funding and are willing to put it in. But, the channels to disseminate this information really lies in the hands of primary healthcare providers, the government, local governments, state governments. That's really where we need the support to disseminate the information.
All right, I totally agree with you. I recall 2 to 3 decades ago where there was a massive campaign against, for family planning. There was also HIV campaign for HIV at that time. It was really massive and very effective at that time. If that approach is adopted, I guess it will make a lot of difference. Now, let's talk about the issue of states not domesticating some of the laws that's supposed to protect the child and all of that. But if steps have to be taken to make a difference, what would it look like?
Okay, well, for the states where, like I said, our recent research focused on the states where it's most prevalent. And incidentally, those states do have laws. I mean, for states that don't, what it will take is for the State House of Assembly to pass the relevant bill, and there's enough to piggyback off. There's the federal VAPP Act, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, and there are various states that have Violence Against Women, Violence Against Persons Act. So the information is out there to put together a law that works, and there's research on what has worked and not worked across the states and across various jurisdictions. And so I'm putting together a bill that's comprehensive and that has the right disincentive for this practice. So we found that for most of this, the acts we looked at, the penalties might not be as prohibitive as they should be. So 100,000 naira as fines, 50,000 naira in Osun State. And while this, I'm not saying 200,000 is not, money, but really, if you are practicing this on a daily basis and you're being paid for it, if you're in Osun State and your fine is 50,000, you pay the fine and then you go and continue what you're doing. So the fine needs to be prohibitive. The jail term where there's one prescribed needs to be sufficiently deterrent to the practitioners of this. And then, of course, so that's what goes in the law and then it gets passed. But beyond passing the law, like I said, these states have these laws and yet the practice is most prevalent there. It is then implementation. The government has to have the will to implement. But in addition to implementation, there needs to be a strong drive to educate and enlighten people.
All right. Thank you so much, Ozofu Ogemudia, for your time and the enlightenment and insight into all of this. Thank you very much for what you do as well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.